I still remember that flight like it was yesterday. Euravia 202, packed with people heading home for Christmas. I was there, sitting in seat 17A, excited to get back to New York and spend the holidays with my family. The mood was light, festive even. You could hear kids giggling, the flight attendants joking with passengers, and the faint sound of Christmas songs playing over the speakers. Next to me was a young mom with her baby, struggling to keep him calm. Across the aisle, a man in a sleek suit typed furiously on his laptop. Some diplomat, I guessed, judging by the official-looking documents peeking out of his bag. Behind me, a guy with messy hair was scribbling notes in a small notebook, muttering something about a big story he was working on. Everyone had their story, their reason for being on that plane. About an hour into the flight, I noticed a guy a few rows ahead of me acting strange. He kept looking at the overhead bin, like something was bothering him. It wasn't panic, but it wasn't normal either. At first I brushed it off, thinking he might just be nervous about flying. But now looking back, it's clear something was off. The clouds outside looked endless, glowing faintly in the sunlight. Everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. While we were cruising thousands of feet above the ground, miles away in northern Italy, something sinister was unfolding. A group of men sat in a dimly lit room, their faces tense. In the middle of the table was a radio, a simple, harmless-looking device. Except it wasn't. The leader of the group, a man in his 40s with a sharp jawline, laid out the plan again, emphasizing every detail. One of the younger men looked uneasy. He couldn't have been older than 25, and you could see the conflict in his eyes. "Do we really have to do this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The leader shot him a cold look. "It's already done," he said, gesturing to the radio. The room fell silent. The plan was simple, or so they thought. The device was already loaded onto Euravia 202 in Paris, hidden inside a checked bag. It was set to detonate over international airspace, far from any chance of recovery. But they didn't account for human error. One of the bags was misplaced during loading, delaying its placement on the flight. This mistake would come back to haunt them. Back on the plane, I noticed a slight jolt, nothing major but enough to make me glance at the seatbelt sign. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and steady, reassuring us it was just some minor turbulence. But my gut told me something wasn't right. It didn't take long before the vibe on the plane started to shift. At first it was subtle, like a whisper you weren't sure you heard. The lights flickered once, maybe twice. Some passengers exchanged nervous glances, but the flight attendants smiled like it was all normal. That's what they're trained to do, right? Keep us calm. But I couldn't shake this feeling, like the air itself had changed. I saw the guy across the aisle, the diplomat, fiddling with a small device. It looked like a satellite phone, but it wasn't working. He frowned, tapping it a few more times before shoving it back in his bag. Behind me, the journalist muttered something about a bad connection. He was gripping his notebook tighter now, his pen moving fast across the page. I wanted to ask him what he was writing, but the guy up front caught my attention again. He was staring at the overhead bin like it held his deepest secrets. His knee bounced nervously and he kept checking his watch. Then, it happened. A sudden, sharp jolt. This wasn't turbulence. It felt different, heavier. The plane tilted slightly to the left before leveling out again. The captain's voice came over the speakers, calm as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a minor technical issue. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Minor technical issue? Yeah, right. I looked around, and you could see it on everyone's faces. Nobody was buying it. I barely had time to process what was happening when the sound hit us. It was this deep, gut-wrenching boom, like the sky itself had split open. The cabin shook violently, and then everything went weightless. People screamed, high-pitched, panicked cries that I'll never forget. The lights went out, and for a few terrifying seconds, all you could hear was the sound of rushing air. I gripped my armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. The plane felt like it was falling, pieces of it breaking apart mid-air. I glanced out the window, and what I saw still haunts me. Part of the wing, gone. just gone. The sky was a mess of debris, and below us, tiny lights from the towns on the ground flickered in the dark. The diplomat was clutching his bag, shouting something I couldn't hear over the chaos. The journalist had unbuckled his seatbelt and was reaching for a kid a few rows ahead. A kid who was crying for his mom. It was chaos, pure and raw. I thought about my family. My mom, my sister, my dad. Would they even know what happened to me? Would they ever get answers? And then, as suddenly as it began, the cabin pressure dropped completely and I felt my body being pulled into the darkness. Everything went black. When I came to, I wasn't in the sky anymore. I was on the ground. Or at least that's what I thought at first. It was freezing, and the air smelled like burning metal. I could barely move, but I could hear voices, distant, frantic, shouting orders. "Over here! We've got another one!" The next thing I remember is being pulled onto a stretcher, people in reflective jackets surrounding me. Someone kept saying, "You're going to be okay." But I wasn't okay. Nobody was. Later in the hospital, they told me I was one of only a handful of survivors. The plane had come apart over a small town, parts of it scattering for miles. Houses were destroyed, lives lost on the ground too. The numbers didn't feel real. Hundreds of people gone just like that. A day later, the investigators came. They had questions. So many questions. What did I see? Did I notice anything strange? I told them about the guy staring at the overhead bin, about the diplomat's satellite phone, and the journalist's frantic notes. They nodded, taking it all down, but their faces told me they already had a lead. The news spread fast. Terrorist attack suspected in Christmas flight tragedy. It was everywhere. On the TV in the hospital room, on my phone, in the hushed whispers of the nurses. They said the bomb had been hidden in the cargo hold, disguised as a simple radio. But that wasn't the whole story. One of the investigators, a woman named Clara, told me the truth, or at least the part she could. She had been following the case of a diplomat carrying classified documents, and those papers might have been the real target. The documents revealed ties between powerful corporations and shadowy groups funding terror worldwide. The bomb wasn't just about chaos. It was about erasing evidence. Clara believed the diplomat was being watched even before he boarded the plane, and whoever planted the bomb made sure it would detonate far from any easy investigation. But there was a problem. One of the handlers at the Paris airport, the one who placed the bag onto the plane, had disappeared. Clara showed me a photo of him, a young guy barely older than me. His name was Julian, and now he was dead, found in a river just hours after the crash. It wasn't random. Someone wanted to bury the truth. Clara told me, "This goes way deeper than anyone wants to admit, but I'll find out the truth. For you. For everyone." She didn't know it, but those words lit a fire in me. I couldn't just walk away from this. Not after everything. It's been a year since that night, since the sky fell apart over that little town. I still think about it every day, about the people on that plane, the young mom with her baby, the diplomat clutching his bag, the journalist trying to save a kid. They didn't get to walk away, but I did, and I owe it to them to make sure their stories don't get buried. Clara kept her promise. She uncovered enough evidence to bring the conspiracy to light. The documents the diplomat carried exposed a network of corruption so deep it made headlines around the world. Government officials, corporate executives, and even some intelligence agencies had their hands dirty, funding terror to gain power and profit. The public outcry was massive. Trials were held, arrests were made, and for a moment, it felt like justice was served. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. I can't forget the people who didn't get to go home for Christmas that year. Now I tell this story. Here. To you. Not just to keep their memory alive, but to remind you how fragile life is. How quickly it can be taken. Sometimes I'll sit outside on a quiet night and stare up at the stars. I wonder if the people we lost that day are out there somewhere, watching. And I promise them every time that I won't let their stories fade. This world can be cruel, but it can also be better. We just have to fight for it. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. And if this story has moved you, share it. Let their memory live on, and don't forget, hold your loved ones close. Life is too short to do anything else. Hey everyone, my name's Ethan, and today I want to share something that still gives me chills. It's about my hometown, Frosthaven, and what happened last Christmas Eve when I went back there for the first time in years. You see, 5 years ago, my little sister Emily, she vanished. It was all my fault. I told her to follow me out onto the frozen lake. I thought it would be safe, but then the ice cracked and, well, I don't know if she drowned or if something worse happened. I just know she was gone. That guilt's been eating me alive ever since. So, last December I decided to face my demons. I figured I'd spend Christmas with my parents and maybe get some closure. But Frosthaven wasn't the same place I remembered. The streets were decorated with lights, sure, but the people, they seemed haunted. I swear every time I passed someone, they'd lower their voice, like they didn't want me to hear something. That night, while unpacking, I overheard my parents whispering. "The train," my mom said. "It's coming back, isn't it?" I didn't know what they meant, but just hearing the word train gave me goosebumps. I couldn't sleep. I walked around the town, hoping to shake off the weird feeling. That's when I ran into Ava, my old childhood friend. She was always nosy, but now she's a journalist, digging into every spooky story she can find. When I told her about my sister, her face got real serious. "You don't know about the Shadows Express, do you?" she asked. That's when she told me about the train. Ava explained it like this. Every Christmas Eve, right at midnight, a ghost train, yes, an actual ghost train, appears in the woods just outside Frosthaven. The locals call it the Shadows Express. According to the legend, it only picks up people with regrets or dark secrets, and once they board, they're never seen again. But here's the freakiest part. On Christmas morning, a single silver bell is found in the town square, and it's said to carry the voices of those trapped on the train. I didn't want to believe her, but the way she described it, it just clicked. Could Emily have been taken by the train? I mean, she disappeared on Christmas Eve and no one ever found her body. Maybe this wasn't just a story. Ava wasn't done. The train isn't just random, Ethan. It's drawn to people who can't let go of their past. People like you. Ouch. But she wasn't wrong. She pulled out a notebook filled with clippings, sketches, and notes from people who claimed to have seen the Shadows Express. Some described it as beautiful, with golden lights and polished wood. Others said it was terrifying, like something out of a nightmare. One thing they all agreed on: the train doesn't forgive. Once you step aboard, you're part of it. I didn't sleep that night. All I could think about was Emily. If this train was real, maybe I had a chance to find her. Or maybe it was already too late. Alright, so here's where things get crazy. After everything Ava told me, I knew I couldn't just sit around. If there was even the slightest chance Emily was on that train, I had to find it. Ava was all in too, not that I gave her much choice. We grabbed flashlights, some snacks, her idea, and headed to the edge of the forest where the old tracks used to be. Let me tell you, the woods around Frosthaven at night? Absolutely no joke. The snow muffled every sound, but every so often I'd swear I heard whispers. Ava kept muttering something about how the train always came when it was meant to. Whatever that meant. By the time it got close to midnight, we'd found what was left of the tracks. They were rusty, broken in some places, but they definitely looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Ava and I stood there shivering, not just from the cold. My heart was pounding. I didn't know if I wanted the train to show up or not. What if Emily was there? What if she wasn't? Then we heard it. At first it sounded like wind, but then it grew louder, like a distant whistle cutting through the silence. Ava grabbed my arm. "It's coming," she whispered. I tried to play it cool, but honestly, I was ready to bolt. Before I could, a dim light appeared through the trees, growing brighter and brighter until it stopped right in front of us. The Shadows Express had arrived. I don't know how to describe that train, guys. It was unreal. Part of it looked like something out of an old Christmas card with golden lights strung along the sides and smoke puffing out of the chimney. But the rest of it was like it had been pulled straight out of a nightmare. The windows were dark and the doors creaked open as if they were inviting us inside. Ava gave me this look like, "Are we really doing this?" And against all common sense, I nodded. We stepped inside. The air was heavy. That's the only way I can describe it. It smelled like old wood and something metallic. Each car we passed was filled with passengers, but they weren't normal. They sat perfectly still, like statues, with this frozen look of regret on their faces. Their eyes would flicker toward us as we walked by, but no one said a word. Then I saw her. Emily. She was in the next car, staring out the window. She looked older, like she'd grown up on this train, but it was her. Same blonde hair, same little scar above her eyebrow from when she fell off her bike. I called her name, but she didn't react. It was like she couldn't hear me. Before I could reach her, a figure stepped out of the shadows. A tall man in a conductor's uniform, but his face, it was wrong. His eyes burned like coals, and his voice was this deep, echoing thing that made my stomach drop. "Tickets, please," he said, holding out a skeletal hand. Ava froze, but I wasn't about to back down. "I'm here for my sister," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle. Then he smiled. Or at least I think he did. It was hard to tell. "Your sister made her choice," he said. "Now it's your turn." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Your sister made her choice. Now it's your turn. What the hell did he mean by that? Emily didn't choose to disappear. She was a kid, for crying out loud. But the conductor just stood there waiting, like he had all the time in the world. Ava nudged me. "Ethan, don't do anything stupid," she whispered. But it was too late for that. I was already in this mess. I stepped forward. "What do you mean her choice? She was just a kid. Let her go and take me instead." The conductor chuckled, this low, rattling sound that made my skin crawl. "It's not that simple," he said. "The train feeds on regret. Your sister's been here all this time because of your guilt. But if you want her to go free, you'll need to take her place." I froze. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my heart was ready to do whatever it took to save Emily. I looked at her again, sitting so still, staring out that window like she wasn't even aware of what was happening. Was she even alive? Or just a shadow of who she used to be? Ava grabbed my arm. "Ethan, don't listen to him. There's gotta be another way." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew the truth. This was it. If I didn't do this, Emily would be stuck on this nightmare train forever. "I'll do it," I said, my voice shaking. "Let her go and take me." The conductor nodded, almost like he was proud of me. "Very well," he said. He reached out a hand, and for a split second I thought it was over. But then Ava did something I'll never forget. She stepped between us. "Ava, no!" I yelled, but she didn't even look at me. She turned to the conductor, her voice steady. "You said the train feeds on regret, right? Well, take mine instead." I couldn't believe it. Ava? What did she have to regret? She was always the strong one, the one who had it all together. But then she looked at me and I saw the tears in her eyes. "I should have been there for you, Ethan," she said. "When Emily disappeared, I just left. I didn't even call to check on you. I thought you'd hate me." Her words hit me harder than anything the conductor could have said. All this time, I thought I was the only one carrying guilt. But Ava, she'd been carrying it too. The conductor tilted his head as if considering her offer. Then he smiled, that awful, twisted smile. "Regret is regret," he said. "It matters not who pays the price." Before I could stop him, he reached for Ava. But something strange happened. The train began to shake, and the lights flickered. The conductor froze, his hand inches from her shoulder. "What is this?" he hissed. That's when I realized it wasn't just our regret fueling the train. It was the choice. The train couldn't take both of us, and it sure as hell couldn't handle someone sacrificing themselves for someone else. Ava's act of selflessness broke whatever power the train had over us. The passengers around us began to fade, their frozen expressions softening into peace. Emily turned to look at me, her eyes wide, and for the first time she smiled. "Ethan," she whispered. Then the train dissolved into mist and we were standing back on the snowy tracks. Emily was there, alive and real, hugging me like she'd never let go. Ava stood nearby, looking as stunned as I felt. The next morning we found the silver bell in the town square. It didn't carry the voices of the lost this time. Instead, it was silent, a sign that the Shadows Express was gone for good. My name's Mark, and this is the story of the Christmas I'll never forget. I was living in a cozy coastal town called Pearl Bay back in 1998. You know the kind of place. Small, close-knit community, beautiful beaches, and everyone gearing up for the big Christmas Eve celebrations. My wife Ellen, our kids Lily and Max, and I had been counting down to the holidays like everyone else. The day started perfectly. Blue skies, laughter, and the smell of Christmas cookies baking. But by the afternoon, things started to feel off. The weather reports began warning about a storm, a cyclone named Vanessa. At first, nobody took it seriously. I mean, storms came and went all the time around here, and the news always hyped things up. Still, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling. "Let's check the emergency kit," I told Ellen. She rolled her eyes, teasing me about being overly cautious. But I went ahead anyway. Lily and Max were more excited about their presence under the tree than any storm that might be coming. By nightfall, though, the winds picked up. The festive lights on our neighbors' houses started flickering, and the air felt heavy. We got another update. Vanessa was intensifying. Ellen looked at me, worry creeping into her eyes. "Maybe we should head to the community shelter?" she suggested. "Nah," I said. "We're safer here if we hunker down." Little did I know how wrong I was. The winds were howling by the time we finished dinner. I tried to play it cool for the kids, but my gut was screaming that this wasn't just a normal storm. We moved the couch to block the windows and put towels by the doors, trying to keep the water out. Outside, it was chaos. Neighbors' trash cans tumbled down the street, and branches snapped off trees like toothpicks. I peeked out the window and saw our next-door neighbor, old Mrs. Harper, struggling to close her shutters. "Stay here," I told Ellen and ran out to help. The wind hit me like a freight train, nearly knocking me off my feet. Together we managed to secure her shutters, but not without her yelling, "You should be in your house, Mark. This one's gonna be bad." Back inside, Ellen was on the phone with her sister who lived a few miles away. She couldn't get through. Lines were already down. That's when the first big crash came. A tree in our front yard toppled, landing just feet from the house. Max screamed and Lily hugged Ellen tightly. "Okay," I admitted. "This is worse than I thought." We decided to move to the safest spot in the house, the basement. It wasn't much, just a small space we used for storage, but it felt like our best chance. I grabbed our emergency kit, some blankets, and Lily's favorite stuffed bear. As we settled in, I could hear the wind tearing through the town. It sounded alive, like it was hunting us. Ellen tried to comfort the kids, but I could see the fear in her eyes. That's when the lights went out, plunging us into darkness. Sitting in the pitch-black basement, I felt like time had stopped. The only sounds were the wind roaring above us, debris slamming into the house, and Max's shaky breaths as he tried to hold back tears. I squeezed his hand and whispered, "We're gonna be okay, buddy." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The storm wasn't just loud, it was relentless. Every few minutes the ground seemed to tremble as if something massive was crashing into the earth outside. Ellen kept the kids close, trying to distract them with soft humming, but her voice was barely audible over the chaos. Then came the moment I'll never forget. A sound so sharp and violent it made us all jump. It was the roof. I knew it even before Ellen's horrified gasp confirmed it. The roof. It's gone, she whispered. I grabbed the flashlight from our kit and shone it around the basement. Dust and bits of debris were falling through the cracks in the floorboards above us. We have to stay calm, I said, trying to convince myself as much as everyone else. Minutes felt like hours, but then there was another sound. This one different. Faint, but distinct. Someone yelling. "Stay here," I told Ellen. She grabbed my arm. "Mark, no." "I'll be fine," I promised, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I climbed up to the main floor, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The living room was a wreck. The Christmas tree had toppled over. Water was seeping in through the windows, and part of the ceiling had collapsed. The voice came again, louder this time. It was Mrs. Harper. Through the broken window, I saw her trapped under a beam from her porch. The storm didn't care. It kept throwing rain and wind at her like she was nothing. Without thinking, I grabbed a tarp and rushed out. The rain hit me like needles, the wind nearly dragging me off my feet. I reached her, covered her with the tarp, and shouted, "Hold on!" With every ounce of strength, I lifted the beam just enough for her to crawl out. We stumbled back to my house, drenched and shaking. "Thank you," she sobbed as I helped her into the basement. Ellen hugged her tightly, and for a moment, it felt like we were all in this together. When the storm finally began to die down, the silence felt almost as terrifying as the noise had been. None of us moved for a while, just sitting there in the basement, waiting for the next crash or gust of wind. But it didn't come. I climbed upstairs cautiously, my flashlight still in hand. The first thing I noticed was how cold it was. The wind had ripped away not just our roof, but most of the walls too. Our home, our safe place, was now barely standing. Outside, it was like stepping into another world. Pearl Bay, the town I had known my whole life, was unrecognizable. Trees lay scattered like broken toothpicks. Cars were flipped upside down or piled on top of each other. Houses that had stood for decades were nothing but splinters. I saw neighbors stepping out of what was left of their homes. Everyone had the same stunned, hollow look. I spotted the Smiths, a family from down the road, walking barefoot through the rubble, clutching each other tightly. Ellen came out with the kids and Mrs. Harper. Max clung to her leg, his wide eyes scanning the destruction. "Daddy, is Santa gonna come back?" he asked. His little voice broke something inside me. I knelt down, trying to smile. "Santa didn't leave, buddy. He just had to take cover like us. We're gonna be okay." We spent the next few hours helping anyone we could. Some people were trapped in their homes, others needed blankets or food. The community shelter was in shambles, but a group of us worked to clear it out and set up makeshift tents nearby. Lily found something small but miraculous: our dog, Rusty, who we thought was gone. She cried tears of joy as he wagged his tail weakly. That one little moment reminded us there was still hope, even in all this devastation. By the end of the day, the mayor gathered everyone who could make it to the town square, or what was left of it. His voice cracked as he spoke, but his words stuck with me. "We lost so much," he said, "but look around. We're still standing. We'll rebuild this town together." And you know what? He was right. This wasn't the end of Pearl Bay. It was the beginning of something new. The days after the storm were some of the hardest we'd ever lived through. We woke up each morning to the sight of our town, our home, reduced to rubble. But despite the destruction, something incredible began to happen. People weren't just sitting around waiting for help. They got to work. Our family joined the efforts right away. Ellen took charge of organizing supplies, food, water, blankets, whatever we could scrounge up. Lily and Max helped too, running around handing out bottles of water or just offering smiles to people who needed it. I think it gave them something to focus on, something to feel proud of. I worked with a group of neighbors clearing debris from the streets. It wasn't just about making paths. It was about making progress, little by little. We found things in the wreckage that people thought they'd lost forever. Family photos, keepsakes, even someone's wedding ring. Every discovery brought tears, but also a sense of hope. What struck me most was how everyone came together. People who barely spoke before were now sharing meals, tools, and stories. Mrs. Harper, who had always kept to herself, was right there with us, helping cook for volunteers. "Guess I owe you all," she joked, though her voice still carried the weight of the storm. Even the kids pitched in. Max, still clutching his stuffed dinosaur, insisted on helping clear smaller debris. Lily kept a notebook, writing down the names of families who needed extra help. It was her way of making sense of everything. One evening, while sitting around a campfire we'd set up near the shelter, the mayor stopped by. He thanked everyone for their efforts and made an announcement. "In a few months, we'll hold a memorial for Cyclone Vanessa," he said, "to honor what we've lost, but also to celebrate the spirit of Pearl Bay. This storm didn't break us, it brought us together." I looked around at the tired, smiling faces of my neighbors and felt something I hadn't since before the storm. Pride. We were rebuilding more than just houses. We were rebuilding our community. Months later, Pearl Bay was a different place. You could still see the scars of Cyclone Vanessa, an empty lot here, a tree stump there. But the town was alive again, and in some ways, it felt even stronger than before. Our house wasn't the same, but it didn't matter. The new roof and fresh paint couldn't replace the memories we'd lost, but they marked a fresh start. The kids had bounced back faster than I expected. Lily turned her notebook into a scrapbook, filling it with stories of survival and recovery. Max, well, he kept asking when the next storm would come. "I'll be ready this time," he'd say, holding his toy hammer like a tiny construction worker. The day of the memorial finally arrived. The whole town gathered in the rebuilt square, surrounded by new lights and decorations. It wasn't like Christmas before, but it was special in its own way. People shared stories, some heartbreaking, others inspiring. Mrs. Harper talked about how the community saved her life. A teenager named Tom shared how he found his lost dog in the wreckage. Even the mayor got emotional, saying, "This isn't just a town, it's a family." When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. Vanessa took a lot from us, but it couldn't take everything. We've got each other, and that's what makes Pearl Bay home. As the sun set, the town lit up with lanterns, one for every person we lost in the storm. Watching them float into the sky, I felt a mix of sadness and hope. Sadness for what we'd endured, but hope for what we were building together. So, here I am now, sharing this story with you. Not because I want sympathy, but because I want you to know what's possible. No matter how bad things get, there's always a way forward. You just have to find it together. And hey, if you made it this far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I've got plenty more stories to share, and who knows, maybe they'll inspire you too. Until next time. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I need to tell you a story, and trust me, it's not your typical Christmas tale. Belhaven, my hometown, was famous for its over-the-top holiday spirit. Picture lights on every house, the smell of cookies in the air, and carolers filling the streets with music. It was perfect, or at least it seemed that way. In my family, Christmas Eve was always a big deal. My parents, Margaret and Henry, loved throwing a party every year, and my sister Emily, she was the real star. At just 8 years old, she had this way of stealing the spotlight, all smiles and laughter. That night, she wore her favorite red dress, running around the house, showing off the doll Santa had dropped off early. The party was packed. Friends, neighbors, even some out-of-towners who knew my parents joined in. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. I remember Emily pulling me aside to whisper about a man she'd seen watching her from the garden. I laughed it off, thinking she was just being her usual dramatic self. The next morning, it all came crashing down. My mom's scream woke me up. Emily's bed was empty. She was gone. At first, I thought she might have been playing hide and seek, but the more we looked, the more real it became. Emily had vanished. That's when my dad found the note. The note was sitting on Emily's pillow, written in messy, almost frantic handwriting. It demanded money, $250,000, and warned us not to call the cops. My dad froze. My mom was shaking so badly she could barely hold the note. I was just numb. Dad broke the rule immediately, dialing 911. Soon enough, the house was filled with police. Detective Charles Whitman arrived first, a tall guy with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. He read the note carefully, asking us if we'd noticed anything strange during the party. That's when I remembered Emily's whisper about the man in the garden. The police began a full search of the house and yard. Neighbors were questioned, and so were the guests. I couldn't believe what was happening. People I'd known my whole life were suddenly suspects. The thing is, Emily's doll, the one she'd been so excited about, was missing too. It felt like a clue, but no one could explain it. That day felt like an eternity. Every hour that passed without Emily felt heavier. Then, a neighbor mentioned seeing someone leaving our backyard around midnight, a man carrying what looked like a large bag. That was when Whitman's attention shifted to a new lead. By the second day, the pressure started breaking us. The cops were digging into every part of our lives. And let's just say, no family is perfect. Turns out, my dad was drowning in debt. We were on the verge of losing the house, and he hadn't told my mom yet. Then there was my mom. A neighbor mentioned hearing her arguing with Emily the day before she disappeared. Something about Emily spilling juice on an expensive rug. It was nothing major, but suddenly, everything seemed suspicious. Whitman's questions grew sharper. He asked about my parents' relationship, Emily's behavior, even my own movements during the party. The media got wind of the story, and soon reporters were camped outside speculating about who might have taken Emily. Some pointed fingers at my parents. It was brutal. The worst part? I started doubting them too. I didn't want to, but the way my dad avoided eye contact and how my mom kept bursting into tears, it made me wonder. On the third day, the search turned into a nightmare. Emily was found, right in our own basement. She was inside an old storage chest, the one we hadn't used in years. The air left my lungs when I heard the news. My little sister gone just a few feet below us the whole time. The autopsy confirmed she'd been hit on the head and suffocated. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. Whitman immediately zeroed in on my parents. The chest was locked and only Dad had the key. How could this have happened without him knowing? The house became a crime scene. My parents were separated for questioning. Mom was inconsolable, and Dad, he just kept repeating, "I didn't do this, I didn't do this." But then another detail came up. The ransom note mentioned the basement, something we hadn't even noticed before. Whitman's suspicion shifted again, this time towards someone outside the family. The break came when they found something on our property, a piece of torn fabric that matched the uniform of the man hired to help decorate the house. His name was Greg, and he'd been acting strange during the party, disappearing for long stretches. When Whitman looked into Greg, things got darker. He had a record, petty theft, breaking and entering, and he hadn't shown up for work the day after Emily disappeared. A search of his home revealed Emily's missing doll, along with tools that could have been used to break into the basement. But here's the kicker. Greg was gone, vanished. It was like he'd been swallowed up by the earth. Whitman said they had enough to charge him if they could find him. But without Greg in custody, it felt like justice was slipping through our fingers. Years later, we still don't have all the answers. My parents moved away, unable to face the stares and whispers in Bellhaven. As for me, I stayed, partly because I couldn't leave Emily behind. Whitman retired, but he kept in touch, promising to update me if Greg was ever found. Sometimes I wonder if Greg was really the one who did it. What if someone else is out there, free, living their life while Emily's was cut short? Every Christmas I light a candle for Emily. It's my way of keeping her memory alive. Sharing this story with you is another. If you've got theories, drop them in the comments. Maybe together we can finally get some answers.